We hear a lot today about toxic masculinity, about oppressive patriarchy, and I want to talk about masculinity in its fullness, good masculinity. And that's one essence of what I'm going to say today, is that sure, there are degenerate forms of masculinity, just as there are degenerate forms of being a female, and there are full, healthy, wonderful, good, beautiful, strong forms of being masculine. Now, the attacks on masculinity, when they are attacks, when they actually try to throw the baby out with the bathwater, when they confuse the corruption of masculinity with masculinity as a whole and try to reject the whole thing, these kinds of attacks often make basic philosophical errors. For example, they try to reduce masculinity to a social construct, which is completely false. It's the sort of thinking you find in humanities departments within universities by people who are very caught in their intellect, people who are neurotically caught in their intellect and neurotically caught up in theories. You find it less, thankfully, in science departments, although that's shifting, because scientific evidence just leads us back to the biological realities that flow through gender. So gender involves both social constructs. There are socially constructed, obviously, socially constructed elements of gender. There are also biologically determined elements of gender. And that's a wonderful thing. If you take a Jungian perspective on this, you can think that masculinity and femininity are things that are encoded in men and women biologically through eons of evolution, and that so while we can get caught in corrupt forms of them, oppressive forms of them, we also have encoded within us as possibilities that we can live out deep, rich forms of them. And that's what I want to discuss today, is the deep masculine, the good masculine, because masculinity is good, and it's something that you don't have to rationally determine and formulate like a social construct. It's something that if you grow as a human being, step away from neurosis and grow deeply and integrate yourself emotionally, intellectually, physically as a human being, as a man, you can grow into a deeper form of masculinity that's strong, good, wise, not at all oppressive. In fact, I'd say that the essence of toxic masculinity, oppressive patriarchy, is the masculine in its immature form. So when you see somebody being oppressive, say sexually oppressive toward women in the workplace, the pig of a boss, the male boss, you'll also find he's also being very competitive and envious and so on with other men, or certainly with quite a number of other men. He's acting out this childish form of his masculinity, which is envious and scared and competitive and aggressive and so on. That's not true masculinity that you're seeing there. That's a corrupt form of masculinity. One of my favourite writers on this topic is a therapist, a Jungian analyst, Robert Moore. And I want to read a passage from one of his books which captures this problem. What is missing is not, for the most part, what many depth psychologists assume is missing, that is, adequate connection with the inner feminine. In many cases, these men seeking help had been, and were continuing to be, overwhelmed by the feminine. What they were missing was an adequate connection to the deep and instinctual masculine energies, the potentials of mature masculinity. They were being blocked from connection to these potentials by patriarchy itself and by the feminist critique upon what little masculinity they could still hold on to for themselves. So in essence, two obstructions to men understanding and developing their masculinity are, one, toxic masculinity. So this oppressive form of masculinity, absent fathers, competitive fathers, aggressive men who want to put you down, put you under their heel. This is one failing to give you a clear sense of what it is to be a man in its fullness, and obstructing you from that growth, because that growth is a threat to such immature men. So that's the one problem, toxic masculinity or oppressive patriarchy, call it what you will. The other obstruction to your development as a man are bad feminist critiques of masculinity. There are many different feminists. Feminists aren't just one person. There are many different women seeing this in many different ways, and some of these women just get it completely wrong when they think about masculinity. And some of them, a minority, but a loud minority, are downright narcissistic about this stuff. They're not really interested in getting a just, true conception of masculinity. They're more interested in attacking and acting out their own problems in their psyche. So, and I'll add here, there are plenty of feminists who don't do that, who have got a healthy psyche and a healthy perspective on masculinity. There are plenty of women who may or may not call themselves feminists who have a very healthy perspective on this. So don't get confused by the loudness of the voice of a mad minority. They're still a minority. And don't get intimidated and stop speaking. Don't lose your capacity to think clearly about this. In fact, what I'd say is shut down Facebook, shut down all the noise, and come back and do work on yourself in terms of trying to understand yourself as a man and growing as a man. So what we need is not less masculinity or more femininity within us. Particular individuals may need to cultivate their more traditionally feminine or nurturing side, definitely. But what we need in the main here in this problem is more masculinity, but better masculinity, more mature masculinity. We need to grow into our fullness of men, as men. Now, there are all sorts of ways of doing this, and I'm a counsellor, so we do this in a therapeutic context. But if I talk about how I do it in my own life, there are various things that help. For one thing, as I say, shut down social media as much as you can. There's a lot of noise on there. There's a lot of madness going on there. Get out in nature as much as you can, and get out in a way that's perhaps challenging. This is good for men and women, and because we are biological creatures, we're animals, all these particular aspects of our being that are striving to flow forth and grow and feel their potential, especially get activated in nature. So getting out to nature and challenging yourself in nature can be very important. Another aspect of this is that I think that men learn a part of who they are to be at their best. Men learn how to become their best and what that looks like, in part through the gaze of other women. Women mirror back to men some of the best of themselves. There are aspects of yourself as a man that can only be mirrored to you by other men. Just as there are aspects of femininity, of feminine nature and women's experience that only women can understand, there are aspects of men's experience and men's nature that only other men can understand. Women can't teach this to you. You need to learn this from other men.